Great. Yeah. Well, I'm finally going to be YouTube famous, right? It's one of my goals I never had in life was to be YouTube famous. So
there you go.
Now you're going to put this on YouTube and I'll be YouTube famous. So
yeah,
no, it's a great opportunity to talk to everybody this morning. Yeah, please, or this afternoon or evening, depending where you're at, I suppose. But you're going to, I'm going to, kind of talk about some kind of the neurocognitive and neuromechanical coupling in rehab and kind of some newer research and things that a lot of great clinicians have done, intuitively for years, but now we're starting to measure it and starting to understand for the processing and the way to kind of realter and think about rehab, in maybe even a little different way for some people, or kind of back what you've been doing for years. So if you look at who I am, I'm originally from Chicago, south side of Chicago. I've been at the University of Arizona for 21 years. Prior to that, I was at Purdue. I got two daughters. I spend as much time as I can mountain biking and skiing and doing active things. And some of the things I may talk about a little bit will have to do with some of those active things, because that's how we process information and how we need to think about it with our patients. So, I just thought, and we've all learned this back in the day in our education. What is your generalized motor program theory, right? So back, Schmidt had a motor program, a set of motor commands, pre-structured, executive level, defines the essential details of the skill. It's an open feedback loop, right? And it gets the pattern going of what we're supposed to do. Okay. And so according to Schmidt, you need to have four things. You need to have proprioception of the limb and trunk. Response is specifically with their speed and force. The sensory consequences are felt, looked, and sound. You heard them. So we're going to really kind of talk about that and how you need to incorporate that in some rehab. And then the outcome of that measure, which contains the information of the actual outcome of the measure, is the knowledge of the results. So you don't think about the individual thing, you think about the results, right? You're not thinking about, you get a motor program of how to swing a golf club, and you can alter it a little bit, but you get it by how it felt, how it felt coming to the ball hitting off the club head, how it looked coming off the club head, and then the results of the knowledge of where that ball went, where you wanted it to go, or in my case, where you had no idea where it was going to go, because that's how my golf game is. So you look at this, you start that activity before even the full stimuli is present, right? So immediately you kick into that motor program you have set, right? As soon as the ball comes off a bat, great outfielders, who play at the highest level are already running backwards or running forward, right? But you see it in Little League, where the kid runs the wrong direction. Ball comes out the bat and he thinks it's going behind him, it's a pop up, right? Where you automatically, how come that you notice that? Or the baseball pitcher throws up his hand quickly in a line drive as soon as it comes off. He can't even process the information, but his hand's going up with the mitt to try to catch the ball. Okay. When you're driving, someone starts to swerve into your lane, you're automatically swerving. You're swerving out of the way before you even realize that you saw something and you start to swerve. You're automatically, because you have this motor program that's been set, right? Race car, driving, is incredibly, fast how quickly you have to do it to make the reactions. Before you're breaking your reactions before you even think, right? And if you could be wrong and you adjust instantly, you make adjustments, and that's the open feedback loop, right? So what does do that? All our senses do that, right? Influence this motor program. Sight, smell, hearing, touch, taste, proprioception, all the vestibular reflexes, and we're going to talk about all those a little bit in a minute too. And how we can, how we train those and how we measure those. But, you talk about a great quarterback who's in the pocket, you a guy like Drew Brees, he's in the pocket, and they say, oh, he sensed somebody behind him, so he stepped up in the pocket and makes the throw instead of getting the ball knocked out or getting sacked. How did he know to step up in the pocket? Well, that's actually your senses, right? He's all subconscious. He doesn't realize it, but he's done it so many times. He hears somebody behind him, or he may feel the pressure wave of the offensive tackle kind of coming into his area, and he feels that, and so he knows to step up in the pocket. He doesn't realize he does it. He doesn't know it. It's a motor program you have that you fine tune it from doing something again and again. Okay, so one of the first things we talk about, you have to talk about, is understanding vision, right? Vision. You have conscious vision, which is detailed discrimination, identification. It's a slower speed. But you have ambient vision. You have, that pre-conscious vision. It's proactive. It predicts the future. It does spatial orientation, balance, and it's very, very fast. You don't realize you're reacting to vision you see. Before you even consciously see it, you're already reacting to it, or it's behind a thing. You know, there's a thing. It's cool. You can look it up on YouTube. This is YouTube famous video, but blind sight. And if you look up blind sight, it's actually people who cannot see. They're completely blind. They don't consciously see anything in front of them, but they've had a lesion on their brain that loses that vision. But there's videos of people like that walking down a hallway, and you leave something in the middle of the hallway. They walk around it and don't trip over it and keep walking. But they couldn't tell you. You couldn't say, hey, what was in the middle of the hallway? They don't know. They didn't see it. But you have this sight that you have. This is a lot what we have, what we do as people, and especially what high level athletes do tremendously. They don't even realize they see something and they're starting to react to it. Okay. So what are all the brain processes that we have to understand and learn and really kind of start to try to measure now? Because we're starting to measure these. Of course, we have, the eye motions, saccades, smooth pursuits, VOR cancellation. You have the spinal reflexes, vestibular spinal, vestibular colic, ocular motor system. You have those, you have those different senses. But you also have areas of the brain, directional cells of the brain. Directional cells tell you, they change direction if you don't see, they know what direction you're facing if you even have your eyes closed. So I'll take a patient after a concussion, or even see how well people do it, and you have them stand and face the wall, close their eyes, you spin them around, you have them squat down, you maybe drop down and have a push-up, you have them stand up with their eyes completely closed the whole time, you have them walk forward, walk backwards, and then you stop them and you say, okay, spin back around and face the wall. And you see if they can go back to facing the wall. Or are they facing the different direction? Some people can turn in directly, go into face the wall. Those are directional cells of the brain. Okay. If you have people who have depression, there's actually data that shows that that portion of the brain is actually atrophied. So the people who have depression, or they say they feel lost. Well, lost may not be a feeling of loss. There actually may be brain things that you can train as a clinician to actually help people with those, to actually get them feeling less lost, because it's actually could be some brain functioning activity. Boundary cells and grid cells are also cells in the brain that give you direction and walk you down a line and things like that. And you can train those and train away from those to strengthen somebody, to make them, even kind of a better athlete or move better. Okay. So we know balance, right? Balance, vestibular spinal, vision has an incorporation of balance, but balance is not static. We measure balance by, okay, stand on one foot or tandem stance, and people, okay, how many airs they have. But that's not what balance is. Balance is a dynamic activity. It's the ability to start to move and adjust, and to have that, that vestibular spinal reflex, that extension reflex, the tone, to get you to make corrections, to be able to plant your leg and cut. So balance is the ability to shuffle to one side, immediately cut, and change direction without excessive body movement one way, without the shoulders going up, those type of things. So those are things we can start to measure and kind of look at. So what is kind of this sports? What is the sports reaction time that this whole process that we need to train and get people back to prevent further injury or to prevent re-injury? Well, the first thing is what you do is you see a stimuli, right? You see a stimuli that occurs. Then you recognize that the stimuli happened, reflexively or cognitively react. You move your feet, your head to a correct position, and your hands and your feet are going to do something with that, right? That's what we have, but that's not really what we have. What do we have? Okay. We have, there we go. Okay. So what happens? Okay. Your brain predicts the future and kicks in a motor program before even all the stimuli is there, immediately, and you start to react. Okay. Then your cerebellum receives all kinds of feedback for a feedback loop from all the mechanoreceptors, the neuroreceptors, the muscle spindles, the GTOs, the positional, your proprioception, all that gets sent back. Your cerebellum then sends information back to get tone stability, which is your vestibular spinal. Your vestibular ocular reflex stabilizes your gaze when you're moving and doing this. Your vestibular colic reflex stabilizes your neck. Your ocular motor system sends more information back to predict the future of where your hands are going to be and how much information, proprioception, how much force you need to do something. So a baseball player is running back. They're running to get to the outfield. the warning track's there. They start to hit the warning track. They feel a different sensation in their feet that gives them information to say, hey, I'm no longer in the grass. I'm now I'm in a little bit of a dirt, and there's a little bit of a mound where the warning track is. They've done it so many times. They know I'm this far away from the wall. So they begin to jump, and they put their hand where the ball is going to land. Okay. Then they know they're going to hit the wall. So they tense up so their arm doesn't flop over the wall. This is all done with all this feedback loop in real time. So when we're thinking of doing rehab with people, we have to start to incorporate all of these things early on, right? But while you're doing this, you also have to have autonomic nervous system regulation, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your pulse, your pupils. Those, you have those going when you change direction, you move, you get your heart rate up. Your energy system needs to be available to do this again and again and again. And you need to do this without interference and at the appropriate speed. What interferes with this? All kinds of things interfere with this, right? Joint pain, headache, sensitivity to noise, effusion, loss of motion, visual field issues. If it's concussion, sensitivity to light noise. If it's if it's an injury, it could be even concussion could be oculomotor and vestibular and issues like that. Fatigue, if they don't sleep well, it affects it. The energy system issues, they're not eating well, they don't have good energy for their system. They could have general fatigue at the end of the day. We know that all this cognitive process information has to pull stuff out of the brain with speed, with recognition, encoding, and recalling. Balance, you have to have vestibulospinal, you have to have the proprioception awareness where you're at. Your autonomic nervous system needs to be regulated, and you can have issues with that primarily from an injury, concussion. You can have it secondary. You can have anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress, which affects the autonomic nervous system. Substance use, drug use can affect all this system. And the future, what we're finding out a lot more is that gut-brain interaction. That gut-brain interaction has a huge factor on a lot of this processing of information, and we're going to learn more and more about that in the future and sooner. And like Andrew Weil, the Integrated Center at University of Arizona, is doing a lot of good research and has a lot of good data on this. So, okay, so all rehab. So if you look at rehab, let's look at sports performance and training rehab. All rehab, is not, you're not rehabbing someone's knee. We're rehabbing somebody's brain to make their knee work with their hip, with their ankle, everything together. So we got to refocus and say all rehab is brain rehab. Okay. So who's doing some of this research out there? Some people out there doing some great research on this. The Lepleys, Dustin Grooms, Gary Wilkerson. There's seen a lot of things out there on it. But we go back. This isn't new information, right? And we've had some of this information years ago. If you look at Buzz Swanick in 2017, and then Gary Wilkerson in 2012, they published information. So one of the things that what Buzz saw all the way back in 2017 was just doing the impact test, and they showed that non-contact ACLs, you had a higher prevalence of non-contact ACLs if you had on the lower, lower impact scores were matched to people who had higher risk of ACL tears versus matched groups who didn't have those lower scores. So even going back there, we are starting to get this understanding of cognitive processing, slowing reaction time down, things like that can affect risk of injury. And now we know this from all the data that's coming out about risk of lower extremity injury after concussion. So if you look at, we go back here in 2015, this was an article that they talked about neuroplasticity following ACL, a framework for visual motor training. Now, the thing of this is it relied on a lot of visual feedback, right? And it was all visual feedback dependent, which that's great, but a lot of things we do don't have that visual feedback. We have to take that out. So it has to be reflexive and actually built motor program without all that visual feedback. Okay. So, Gary Wilkerson and Dustin Halbin and a few others looked at using TRAZER, and they could predict that, they could look at people who had history of concussions, okay? And those people had slower visual motor reaction time and whole body reaction time less, right? So performance of the dual tasking identified these neuromechanical deficits in elite athletes who had history of concussions. So they had a match group. They looked at high-level athletes, and they could predict from using these two different things on a system such as TRAZER who had history of concussion. So that's telling you you're even way down the line, you're not processing the same. We're starting to see that more also for chronic, for long-term injuries, your ACL recoveries and things like that. Okay. So looking at this, this is article here is, he could predict who had 2 or more concussions, looking at reaction time in deceleration on the lateral shuffle and more in the kind of going back angles. And what deceleration is balance, right? Because it's the ability to stop. How quickly can you stop and change direction and go the opposite direction? We can start measuring that with different devices now. So if you're doing a shuffle and you plant and come back, if one side one side is significantly statistically slower than the opposite side, that's balance. That's sway. We have somebody in sway, and now they have extra sway. But if you plant your foot and you start to sway and go over before you come back, that's the risk of, changing a Q angle. That's the risk of the weight shift, to have the high quickness of a tearing of an ACL or having an ankle sprain is affected by your ability to stop and change direction. So we can measure that, and Gary could look at the numbers without even somebody's history of concussions, and then went back and looked at concussions and was able to predict who had 2 or more concussions, which is kind of a scary thing. That means we have a lot of people playing out there and they're not processing information as quickly as they can. Oops, we don't need to watch a video. So this one's, looking at here, neuromechanical, considerations of post-concussion musculoskeletal injuries and risk, right? Current, our clinical assessment may not be adequate, to identify diminished capacity for neuromechanical response. And this is the key factor in elevated risk. Okay. So now we're starting to look at some research. This comes out of Dustin Grooms and his lab and some of the other people they're doing. And this is really interesting data, because what they did is they took people 2 years out of an ACL reconstruction, put them in a functional MRI, and all they did was knee extension. And what they found was, they had even 2 years, these people were back to full activity, no restrictions, not having any issues with it, but they still had increase and decrease in brain activation in multiple areas of the brain. One area they found, which was interesting, was the occipital lobe lit up when they did something as simple as active knee extension. Okay. So one of the conclusions was the ACL reconstructed brain activation profile may indicate a shift towards more of a visual motor strategy as opposed to a sensory motor strategy that originally engages in the movement. Okay. So again, when you start to do rehab with people, if they have early on, if you're doing quad sets and looking at the knee, or you're doing step downs and they're watching the quad fire and doing it, you're reinforcing the occipital lobe to light up when the quad fires. Okay. So some simple things that we intuitively do, but we don't intuitively do it early, is you always keep your head up, you keep your vision tracking, you move your eyes around when you're doing rehab. Don't ever let them look down. Because when they do functional activities, they never need to be looking down. They don't need to be looking down at their leg. So you start to incorporate the vision and tracking when they're doing rehab, and you do it at the beginning when you're getting the muscle to refire again, when you're actually rewriting that motor program again after it's been shut down, or you're reactivating it again. You don't want something else to activate with it. So some simple rehab changes there. This was one that looked at neurocognitive challenges of a HOP test to reduce functional, performance. They actually did a cognitive challenge along with the HOP test. And when they did that, their distance for their HOP test went down. Okay. So what made you decide if you had to hop, if you had a light flash, you have to go and you have to do a single hop with this light, a triple hop with this light. And they looked at these things. And of course, when they did dual task, their performance went down. So again, another thing you need to incorporate early on, very early in rehab, is dual tasking. So you can improve that so you don't have that drop off as much. Again, another data here, coming out of, this is out of Lepley's lab. But eccentric, exercise control to enhance neuromuscular control, eccentric exercise, sorry. And it's importantly, again, they're talking about brain processing. Importantly, the cerebellum plays a key role in processing units for muscle coordination. So eccentric control activates better increases the motor cortex. So you want to make sure you're focusing a lot early on eccentric loading, because it actually enhances brain activity better. Okay. So what do people love to do? We love to do ladders. And so what I did is I took all these pictures off of a bunch of people doing ladders. And where are they looking when they're doing ladders? They're looking down. And what sport do we ever look down? You know, you keep your head down in golf. Soccer looks down a little bit, but then they're looking up. They're not constantly down staring at their feet. What other sport looks down all the time? They don't. You have to look up. So when we train people and rehab them and do that thing, why are we ever having them look down? It doesn't make any logical sense, okay? So we want to focus on neuroplasticity of the brain early on in rehab. So you want to do dual tasking activities early on. You want to get multiple areas of the brain working together. You want to make the activities they're doing reflexive motor program. That's not thought cognitive process, because if you got cognitive, you're thinking too slow. If you need the visual field to help you, you're already behind. Okay. So when you're starting to look at some of the things that you can measure, you can do these. You can also do these on TRAZER. They have the psychometrics. You can use things like the Eriksen Flanker test, which is a 5-areal test. A Stroop test, which is a color matching test. You go by the word versus the color of the word using math problems. So this is the Eriksen Flanker test. You have congruent and incongruent. If the arrows, you have to always go the direction of the middle arrow. So if you have to go the direction of the middle arrow, and this pops on the screen and goes away. So you have to pay attention. You have to have your eyes up. You have to see it, and you have to kick in. And I do this. I do this with people who have ACLs and even total joints. As soon as they're able to walk, they're doing this because they're processing. And it's amazing how unstable, unfeeling, they don't feel safe moving around, and they're kind of very tentative. Once you put them and start to do something with a cognitive challenge, it kicks in the old motor program, and all of a sudden they're walking better, they're moving better, they're shuffling better, because they're not thinking about what they're doing, they're thinking about something else. You're keeping them in a controlled environment so they're safe, but you're getting them to move in a better pattern that they already have. They just need to kick it back in. Okay. Stroop test. So Stroop is a color test, and it's a word matching test, and it's a known neuropsychological test, just like Eriksen Flanker. And you go to the direction, that the word says. So you read blue, and you go to the direction of blue, even though blue's in yellow. And you kind of have to cognitively process a couple of steps of information. And there's some things you can do, some other things we can do. But if you look at some of the things that the TRAZER does, is you can set up a lot of these things. You can measure heart rate, and you can measure it stops, or as soon as you get to the middle, the next one pops up, how quickly the prompt time disappears. So you something flashes on a screen, then it goes away, then you have to move your body. We're starting to do this stuff with concussions, and we've been doing it for a while with boards and touching and computer tests. But we don't move our finger on a keyboard in life. We move our feet and have to move in a certain direction. Why our eyes our gaze stabilization is happening. Why we plant and shift. Why we don't have sway. All those things. Okay. So some of the tests that the Flanker can measure is you have like some lateral, the agility speeds, and it gives you some report. You can do random. You can do some kinematics and watch how the watch how the movement patterns of the body moves. You can compare neurocognitive processing with just straight reaction time, which is a really interesting thing. That's a big concussion. It's a big benefit for concussion. If you add a processing versus just moving, your gap of that thing is wider after a concussion, and you want it to be closer together. You want to be able to move as quickly if just something pops up, or you do a simple flanker test or a simple math problem. You want to be able to move nearly as quick. So you can look at things for orthokinematics of the angles that you have, the angles of the knee, those different type of things, how your body's moving in space, all these different angles. You can, when you start moving test variables, you can do all these different variables, and you can actually get objective measurements on these and compare them to baseline or compare them to improvement. Or the main thing you compare is you look at asymmetries right to left, because that's the key to concussion and that's the key to injury. You want them to be able to move equal right to left. So these are your reports you get. You get reports like this, you can see, some of the symmetries, and you look for asymmetries, and you see you can very, very easily see the triangle going to the right is different than the triangle going to the left. Guess what? That shows you have asymmetries right to left. And again, you put people on this immediately. You put them on day 3 after, or within the first week after a total a total knee or a total hip or an ACL or a bad ankle sprain, and you keep them on it. You can do different things all the way through the whole rehab process, and you can go faster and things like that. So here's some more of the reports. It can kind of get you good. These look pretty good because you're all symmetrical, right? So you don't have a big change shift one way to another. You can see on this bottom one down here, corner deceleration. If you see it's a little shorter and your deceleration difference is 18, is right there is 18% difference between deceleration. That's a direct marker of balance and sway. You can look here again. You have some of your different markers of your angles going in your diagonals. You can look at the difference. You can really look at the reports to do that. Again, it's interesting because when you start to work people, you not only want to work them in a line of what they're doing, but you want to work them at angles so they don't have extra feedback to help them. So if you want somebody to shuffle and you want them to stay in a line, this is a rehab thing too. You haven't faced the wall, but then you haven't faced the angle of the wall a little bit. So then they can't use direction, they can't use vision cells in their vision to give them feedback. They have to work on the directional cells of their brain to give them feedback to stay perfect linear. Because when you're an athlete and you're playing defense basketball, you've got to move and you got to move and you got to predict, you got to go in a line of where that other person's going. Your vision's telling you, predicting where they're at, but you also have to predict your how fast you have to go. So then you have to also use your directional cells to say what's the best angle to get there. So you want to train all those things early on. Okay. Changing the angle of things, even on TRAZER, what you're doing with people, you want them to do things at different angles and different places so you can start working these directional cells and these grid cells of the brain and things like that. Okay. Dual tasking is to me, dual tasking is the key. Simple things should be done at with dual tasks. You should be doing dual task. If you have somebody who has a shoulder issue, when they're doing their shoulder rehab, having them stand on something for balance. So they have to activate the core and keep the balance while they're doing simple shoulder exercises. Okay. You want to increase the demands by incredibly early add things. If they're a sport athlete, add what they're doing with rackets and paddle, pickleball paddles if they play pickleball, which I think every person over the age of 65 now plays pickleball. At least in Arizona, they all do. All of your things that intuitively great clinicians have done, lunges on foam pads. I love talking to people why they make them do their exercises. So they actually concentrate. They have to actually have something else to pay attention to why they're doing them, and they're not having to really they got to make sure they're doing them correct with correct technique with an external stimuli, and kind of adding different problems to it. Early on, there's things like this is kind of a shift and bump, which is just a right, left step, forward, back, squat, or calf raise. So again, you can do things like that even without the technology, and we can talk about that. But again, the key here is increasing cognitive demands while doing dynamic activity. The actions need to become reflexive, not thought. If you're mountain biking and you think of when you're going down something and you hit rock, if you actually think about, I have to have my weight shifted back and leaning back, you're going over the top. Okay. You have to intuitively, automatically, as soon as you start to get that feeling of sensation of going forward, your butt has to drop and sit backwards. Okay. You can't cognitively think about it, because if somebody's cognitively thinking about keeping their balance, they've already fallen. Okay. Again, the sports reaction time, you got to work all these systems while you're doing your rehab. You got to make sure it's a motor program. You want feedback loops. You want their ocular motor system, their vestibular ocular system to work. You want to challenge their vestibular spinal system, their specific colic reflex, so they have neck stabilization. You want to do that while you're getting their heart rate up, while their blood pressure's up, while their autonomic nervous system, to challenge that. And do it when they're fatigued, so they have to kick in the energy system. Okay, and you got to make sure you're all doing it without interference. All right, I talk pretty fast, I know that. Ashley, any questions, or what do you have for me?
Yeah, so a couple. On my end, I was jotting some stuff down as you were talking. The first one I wrote down was, I was thinking about you were talking about, we're training the brain right, out of the jump here. if we're talking about early post-op, some of the ones that can't be doing as much up and moving around, for example, I treat mostly hip scopes. We have them on crutches. Is it something where it'd be worthwhile to start incorporating brain type games on the table when they're doing table exercises? Is that, or does it need to be related to what they're doing? Like if they're doing, you know, some sort of puzzle game while they're doing their exercises, is that stuff that's worthwhile, or is there anything that would show that?
Yeah, no, I think so. Or you challenge the tempo they're doing the exercise. You do a metronome, or you put music on in the background and you put Staying Alive versus some slow Justin Timberlake song, right? And you say, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to do your, your straight leg raises at the speed up and down of the tempo of the song, right? Okay. So they're trying, you're doing a dual tasking activity, but doing the same thing, but you're having them do, different tempos. That's a kind of a simple way. Oh, okay. How many repetitions am I going to do? I don't know. Let's make it some kind of game to decide how many repetitions you're going to do, right? If you can stay within this pace, you're going to do this many. If you have to go out of this pace, you're doing this many. Be creative with some of the different things that you're going to do with them. I would say don't have them watch their body part move. Okay. Say, I want you to raise it up 6 inches. But you say, okay, and you raise it and you hold it 6 inches for them, and you say, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to get to this height. Okay. Then you have them keep raising it to that height, and you see how close they are, because that's a dual tasking thing. Like, how high do you lift it? Okay, I want you to feel this normal. I don't want you to get visual feedback to help you get it.
Yeah. And in that same way, when you were talking about TRAZER, and then there's a couple audience questions, but the big thing I've seen in I use TRAZER as well, and some of the TRAZER users, and I've seen some like Instagram things getting posted, is people who put tape lines on the floor, and we don't do that because, again, the tendency then is everyone's looking down at the tape line. So I would assume that that's something that you would agree is not what we want to be doing, right?
That's the opposite. And what I do too is I don't like even having it mounted on a wall, because then you can use the wall as a guide to see what your depth is, to say for your shuffle and find your targets. Or you use the floor, the lines in the floor, or dots in the floor. I like putting it on a cart, and you take people and you say, okay, now I'm going to put an angle one way today and angle another way the next day. Yeah. So then I never thought about that. So then they have to, they don't use, you see everything around you, the corners of the ceiling, the air ducts in the ceiling, all of those are feedback. And if you do something again and again in the same place, you use all those as reference points. So it's not, I use the analogy, it's kind of like the home court gym. Everybody shoots better at their home court. Why? Because they know everything so well. And the same thing. So you want to train them out of their home court advantage.
And we have a question specifically about TRAZER, but before I ask that one, for those who don't have TRAZER currently, or what sort of, you gave some table examples, any other ideas for those that maybe don't have some of the higher technology ways to incorporate these ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think flashcards, right? Flashcards are great. And you put up a flashcard, and you do even higher cognitive challenges, right? So you do things like, you say, okay, you're going to do a 5-10-5 shuffle, okay? And I'm not going to point you. I'm not going to say, oh, go to the right to start or go to the left to start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a flashcard, and then I'm going to drop it down quickly, okay? Mm-hmm. If the answer is even, go to the right. If it's odd, go to the left. Mm. And you do simple ones, 3 + 2. 4 times, 4 times 1, 6 minus 2, right? But then you keep a couple of real hard ones in there, and then you throw up the square root of 81. And almost everyone, when you throw up a square root, they stop. Yeah. Because all of a sudden they got to figure out, oh, what's the square root of 8? How do I do? Okay, that's 9. And then they don't remember the second point of it was, oh, now was 9 is what? Oh, odd. Now was odd right or left? Because they become so focused on 2 variables. When you throw in square root, that adds a 3rd variable, and you're like, I can't remember that, right? But in life, that's what we do. In sports, we have to make decisions based on something else. You're a basketball player. you're a basketball player, and you know that from your scouting report that when 21 goes in the game, she's phenomenal going to the left, but she's not fast at all going to the right. So when you get in there, you see 21 and you realize, oh, I got to cheat. I'm going to cheat to the right because she can't go to the left. So I'm going to give her left, but I'm not going to give her the right because she's got a great right move, first right, to the right. So you learn that from scouting report, but you have to see 21 go in the game, recognize it's 21, recognize you're playing defense against 21, and then make your adjustments. That's what great athletes do. That's what people do who can make really split-second decisions really well.
Yeah. Well, so we had a couple of questions here, and I think what I'm going to do, first of all, we're really fortunate that, TRAZER is a sponsor of IJSPT, and they were the ones that were kind enough to reach out to you and get your expertise to come on here and give some educational information. But Craig Waters, you're on here, and I'm going to promote you to a panelist real quick because, let's see if that'll work. Here we go. I figure, a couple of people have some questions about TRAZER specifically, and you can put your information in here. But talking about, well, first, Randy, for you, so don't forget, are you willing to do a PDF of the PowerPoint we can shoot out to the participants?
Sure.
So they can have that information?
Yeah.
So he can get that to me and I'll send that out to you guys. And then there's a question about how much TRAZER was, and is it a rental or lease type model, those sorts of things. So Craig, I pulled you back to a panelist here so you could maybe give a little information on how to find out more about TRAZER.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to find out more about TRAZER is go to the website, which is trazer.com, or you can reach out directly to me. I think I just put that into a question, Ash, my contact information, but I can share it. But my phone number is 330-705-6674 or cwaters@trazer.com.
And I just threw that in the chat as well.
Awesome. But the system is you pay a upfront fee for the hardware which is the camera and the computer that drives the software, which is all the simulation that you see the activities. And then there's a monthly licensing fee. We don't charge by the test. It's just one monthly licensing fee for as many people as you put on it as possible. And it's a yearly commitment that renews each year. But again, you can reach out to me and we can talk more about that, or we can do a demo just of TRAZER for you, through Zoom very easily from our office if you'd like.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Suzanne asked, can you use playing cards the same way as index cards or flashcards like you were talking about, Randy?
No, for sure.
Yes.
It's a great idea. And then you can get as simple as you pull out something from a deck and you say, this is how many hops you make one way versus another. And, or in the middle, they're in their third hop going to one direction and you pull up another card. You say, okay, how many you got going the other way? Okay, up, you got this many. And then they have to count, they have to figure out what they're doing and move, all kinds of things with playing cards. You can say different things with colors and, with the colors and the suits and make them really get, you can do as simple as complicated as you want to do, and just be creative.
Yeah. Zach asked, does TRAZER software have the ability to communicate raw data points that it collects from the sensors at each body part where a clinician can code or create their own reports? I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. So it's a camera-based system. There's no wearable sensors on it. There's data there's kinematics data that can get collected on things like squat, single leg squat, balance, where measures are taken, and you could certainly look at individual measures from those.
And Ash, the data can be within your own TRAZER portal where the data gets uploaded into the HIPAA compliant cloud. That data can be dropped down from a CSV into an Excel that you can work and tie in with other data that you might be collecting with other modalities and other softwares.
Right. Yeah, so definitely, if you have interest in more of the specifics on that, I'd recommend setting up a demo with TRAZER and asking them questions. You can always reach out to me as well. I've been using it in the clinic for several years. I'm sure Randy'd be happy to answer questions as well. So then, the nice thing is it's fun for the patients, so they enjoy that, but we can turn, fun into a testing device and also kind of a training device. But so it's a nice, well-rounded piece of equipment to have in the clinic. Any other questions out there, guys? Let's see. Perfect. We answered Zach's question. Great. Anything else on here?
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Let's see. How much, if any, value do you put in changing the client's environment early in their rehab process? Thinking we are on one table one day, another the next, or is this training area one day, or this training area one day versus another? So just kind of like different locations in the clinic, different visual feedback, I think is what that question is asking. Randy?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you're getting up to more functional activities, I think it does, it does change it a little bit. And I would definitely say, different floor surfaces for sure. You want to change up as much as possible that you can have the brain have different challenges early on. So it doesn't become is expecting one thing and getting kind of that. You want to have open feedback loops a lot when you're doing things, right? And I think clinicians have done that for a long time. That's why a lot of people say have foam pads, right? You step on the foam pads, you do a lot of things. You're doing that consistently. But are you doing that foam pads for the upper extremity athlete or the core stability athlete, or is it just for the lower extremity? And if you're not doing it for the person who's doing shoulder rehab, why not? Why aren't you having them stand on a foam pad and one foot on the foam pad, one off, one knee bent a little bit when they're doing their shoulder rehab? Because when they're lifting things, they may have to step up on something. They may have something a little bit off, right? So are you doing that? Are you challenging them in those ways with not just a traditional think, it's a shoulder, I'm just going to focus on the shoulder. A shoulder, you're not rehabbing the shoulder. You're rehabbing the brain to make the shoulder work. Your vestibular spinal system has to stabilize and have good balance while you do it. You also have to have good knee bend and good leg control when you're doing that, right? We're not rehabbing a shoulder. We're rehabbing the brain to make the shoulder work. So we got to rehab the whole body. Yeah. And so we need to think of that when we're doing rehab, and we had to work the vision system, right? I mean, they bought me snowballs last Christmas, and we have these little sponge snowballs around the clinic, and I'm allowed to throw at any patient whose head's down when they're doing rehab. I'll throw snowballs at them. And everyone knows that. As soon as I walk in the room, everybody's head pops up. It's like, oh, Randy's going to yell at me. It doesn't matter if it's my patient or someone else's patient. I'm like, why are you looking at the ground? And then I jokingly say, no one looks at the ground. I say, well, no one's head's down. I go, well, except unfortunately, a lot of people in this generation, because their head's down looking at their phone while they're walking. I was
gonna say, if my patients were watching this, they would argue that that's their excuse to be allowed to do like watch their TikTok videos while they're in the clinic. They're always trying to be on TikTok and Instagram while they're in the clinic. Yeah. So.
Well, Randy or Ashley, you've probably seen Kevin Wilkes' videos on Instagram. I mean, he introduces a lot of stimuli in his clinic, and they're constantly being challenged to do other things where they don't even realize what they're rehabbing while they're doing it, because they have to focus on the activity at the time. It's really
We in the clinic we just opened. We have a cornhole that we do. A lot of people a lot of their balance is doing cornhole. We have a basketball hoop, so we have even athletes who are for whatever injury they're doing. Or we have a record of the day of who makes the most shots from one spot, standing on a basketball hoop, standing on a Bosu ball, one footed on a Bosu ball. How many can you make in a row? And so we have those. We have those type of things where you got to challenge the whole body.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions out there? Someone asked, could you share the recording link? So I'm recording this, and then I will get it edited and get on our YouTube page, and then our office will send out an email with the link to the YouTube so you guys can rewatch this. And when we do that, I'll get the PDF slides and shoot that out as well to the participants for you guys. Let's Let's see, here's another one. A lot has been discussed on the use in rehabilitation. When do you discontinue using these additional cognitive challenges, or do you think there's value in incorporating these in warm-up, cool-down activities for uninjured athletes?
You know, when you rehab somebody and they're back to sport, this is what they're doing every day in sport, right? So you're challenging these in sport every single day. Do I think that, part of the rehab and the warm up? I think if you talk to most psychologists, some sports psychologists and clinical psychologists who work with athletes, this is exactly what they do, right? They get them, they get them to get in a place where they get out of their own mind. So they're not thinking about what they're doing. They're getting into that idea of, I'm getting my mind, my body ready to work reflexively in the best way it can in a relaxed mode, right? So that's why your psychologists have people warm up and listen to a certain song, and they're warming up while they're kind of half dancing, right? And you talk about rehab. I mean, I think one of the best rehabs you can do to anybody in a clinic is dance. You put music on the background where people are dancing, and let them dance, right? I jokingly we do a lot of we'll do external rotations up at 90 degrees, and we'll do walkouts with you doing the row, and we'll have music on, and I'll say, hey, you need to dance, you need to move to the music while you're doing your external rotations, right? Move to the music a little bit while you're rocking your trunk a little bit while you're still externally rotating your shoulder, right? So, those of us who are Craig's old enough to you do the John Travolta. You can be the John Travolta with a TheraBand, right? Exactly. That's hey, D2, all he was doing is D2, D2 PNF pattern. That's all John Travolta was doing, So, probably a lot of people on your call don't even know who John Travolta is. So.
Bob Gray, who certainly has quite a bit of experience in concussions, is on here tonight and asked, when do you introduce dual tasking with concussions, Randy?
Bob, I do it incredibly early, but I do it at a level that that doesn't. It's all non-symptom provocation. So I'll put people on, and we do these things incredibly early, because dual tasking to move your body, right? Because what you do is sometimes when you do dual tasking, when you're doing exercise early on, they're not thinking about their symptoms, and they can actually exercise and get their heart rate up higher without symptom provocation, because they don't have that concern and that worry. And I'll tell you, for somebody, if you have that, you have the risk of that anxiety driven prolonged concussion. I dual task crazy early at a low level, because then they're not thinking about their symptoms. They're not thinking, is my head getting worse? They're actually doing something else. And then you can show them, say, hey, do you realize you just did exercise for this long, and you got your heart rate with this, and you didn't complain one time about your headache? And they're like, oh, wow, I did. Wow. Okay. Yeah. And so they actually can improve. So I'll do it, or I'll do it very, very early.
And then last one here, missed the initial part of the session. What are the sensors used to measure concussion of the brain? Any correlation between concussion and acceleration? I think what we're doing is we're measuring how the body moves, right? So we're not really looking at the kind of the acceleration during the concussion, between the correlation between the acceleration and brain. But what we're seeing is the sensors will look at asymmetries. So you're looking at asymmetries between reaction time, between acceleration, deceleration, and speed. Primarily, you're looking at reaction time and deceleration, the two you're looking at. And speed and acceleration really aren't markers that you see that come up after a concussion. And then the flanker types, that like the neurocognitive piece of it, the flanker and those things.
And it's amazing how I have one patient who's had a significant oculomotor and vestibular issue, and he's had multiple concussions, and he his flanker test, he gets, if you look at the arrow, incongruent arrow going one direction versus the other, one side he barely can get 40% right, and the other side he's in the 90. So he has a processing brain going across his brain. There's a disconnect between right and left side of his brain. So he actually does have probably some sort of brain injury. There's some disconnect between the right, but by using TRAZER and decreasing the prompt time, he's gotten significantly better. And I don't know another tool that we could have measured that and actually noted improvement on it. I don't know of any other tool out there that you can.
Yeah. And then in large team settings, could a simple implementation be switching an order of pre-lift activation? Groups move one way through normal station style activation, but reverse order give us an added benefit. I mean, I think from everything we've talked about, and Randy, you can jump in too, that I think anytime you're kind of mixing it up and making it more real life situation, just variability, more of that random practice versus block style practice is probably beneficial in general.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is some of it has to do with is also challenging the systems when you're fatigued.
Yes.
I think that's important. You get the fatigue, and you see, and the nice thing you can do, when you have some of these measuring tools that we have now, and not just TRAZER, but some of the other things, even some of the GPS data, is you could actually track fatigue better by seeing decremental of function, decremental of top speed, decremental of reaction time. You see that over time, and that will tell you if somebody's safe to be able to go back to sport and be able to go back to sport for a long period of time, right? So you get them on there, you fatigue them, then you retest them, and you say, hey, even with fatigue, you still have symmetries. They don't come up later on, or your reaction time is still as quick, or you're still able to decelerate within a good, safe margin, even when you're fatigued, which you want to make sure you can do with people.
And then this will probably be our last one here. What are return to sports recovery objective indicators or variables from concussion? I think that's one of them you just talked about there.
Yeah, I think the big one, and Gary Wilkerson talks about this a lot, is asymmetries versus symmetries, right? Most people, you very rarely find statistically significant asymmetries in people who aren't injured. They have pretty good symmetries, right? Doing these tests, but you see significant asymmetries in concussion, because if you have an injury in the brain, it's not, you don't have it equal on both sides, right? It's one side. And so you will see asymmetries of reaction time and asymmetries of cognitive processing of information with the visual field from vision, getting cognitively processing. And then you'll see asymmetries in deceleration, which is balance and sway. So you'll see those. And I think that's the big objective markers you see is asymmetries. And the other one we're starting to look at, and we don't have enough data on it yet, but I think we're going to have more and more, is the concept of the gap between moving your body when you have a cognitive challenge versus when you just have a quick reaction time challenge. So you get something to pop up and you have to move, then you get something where you have to cognitively, it doesn't have to be difficult cognitive, it's just a cognitive challenge. Stroop Test, Eriksen Flanker, simple math problem. You have to cognitively to answer something and then move, versus just, hey, you have to move. And what I think we're going to have, and it was just some indications now, but the data's not big enough yet. But the idea is the concussion people should have a less of a gap of that challenge. And that's what we want to do. And we haven't been doing it. We've been starting to do it, but COVID kicked in, but we're going to do all that with, baseline. Our baseline test was going to be that NST, which is going to look at that difference between the two.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been really great. It stimulated me to think we probably need like a couple of you guys to maybe throw together an updated clinical commentary on the status of all this stuff for IJSPT. That might be a good thing to put on the 2023 agenda. Even I know you guys are really active doing a lot of research on it, but even just some of the thought process behind it and a little bit more background on where this all came from would be awesome. So I appreciate your time tonight, Craig. I appreciate you jumping on and TRAZER supporting this educational webinar. Like I said, I will get the recording up on our YouTube page, and it'll get sent out via email. So that will be out ASAP. And again, if there's any questions related to TRAZER, Craig's info is in the chat. Reach out to me directly with anything, and we're glad to have you and look forward to seeing you guys again soon. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye.